Spoilers for Elbaf, but we know that Loki has a special friend named Mosa, and the official English name for Mosa is Shaggy. Now, they talk to this person via a snow Dendemushi, whom is Harry, and in the Dendemushi being Harry lies the joke. I'm going to prove to you today that the identity of Shaggy is actually the mermaid princess Shirahoshi. Now, the funny thing about proving this is that Loki and Shirahoshi have a lot of narrative parallels throughout the story of One Piece, and there is an ongoing joke in reference to Shirahoshi that might be important. So, to start us off, both Shirahoshi and Loki are linked via one group in One Piece. That group is now the Fire Tank Pirates, formerly the Rolling Pirates and Fire Tank Pirates, but now thanks to the ending of Capone Beiji's cover story, the two are presumably joined together because in chapter 489, in which Brook joins the Straw Hats in Thriller Bark, the mermaid princess is alluded to by the Risky brothers of the Rolling Pirates in saying that she is more beautiful than Boa Hancock. Now, in some translations, the reference is to mermaids as a whole, but we know that's not actually true because way later in Fisherman Island during chapter 618, Sanji is most likely talking about this very conversation, and he is talking about the mermaid princess specifically being more beautiful than the pirate empress Boa Hancock. But however, this is where I think web theory might be at play, where similar themes and story points are connected to each other and are repeated throughout the story of One Piece, because the Rolling Pirates are captained by Charlotte Lola. Charlotte Lola is the twin sister of Charlotte Chiffon. Charlotte Chiffon is the wife of Capone Game Beiji. Now, in chapter 858 during Whole Cake Island, it is Charlotte Chiffon who tells us that Loki, the Prince of Elbaf, was supposed to marry Charlotte Lola. The reason why this is interesting because now both Loki and Shirahoshi have been referenced in the same context by two people whom then are related in being a part of the same group. Because as I mentioned, the Rolling Pirates in their entirety are now a part of the Fire Tank Pirates, thanks to the Capone Gang Beiji cover story. So both Shirahoshi and Loki are mentioned by the same group in passing during a casual conversation. With that being said too, what's so interesting about this even further is that in Elbaf currently, we are going over a Brook backstory in which we are exploring the life and times of Brook as a child and a young man during the time in which he was a part of the Asperia Kingdom before he was a pirate in the West Blue. What is further more interesting about this is that the two times in which this information is being referenced, both in reference to Shirahoshi and again to Loki, is during times in which Brook is at the forefront. The Rolling Pirates talk about Shirahoshi during the chapter in which Brook joins the Straw Hats officially. Then, in chapter 858, we know that that is during the time of Whole Cake Island. Brook was instrumental throughout the entirety of Whole Cake Island, as his powers were an antithesis to the homies created by Big Mom, and he was actually the one to break Big Mom's photo of Mother Caramel. This is also quite interesting because Brook is associated with gangsters in the events of Whole Cake Island. However, in his backstory that we're going over in Elbaf, it is he who cuts down gangsters from the West Blue during his flashback. This is important because we know that there are 5 criminal families of the West Blue, of which Capone Game-Beiji in the present has taken down or at least crippled during his time rampaging throughout the West Blue until he became a pirate. So to break things down before we move forward, both Loki and Shirahoshi are talked about in passing by people who would eventually become part of the same group in the Fire Tank Pirates. A rolling pirate mentions Shirahoshi in passing, and Charlotte Chiffon, sister of Charlotte Lola, mentions Loki in passing. But then both situations heavily involve Brooke in one way or another, because Shirahoshi was brought up during the time in which Brooke was joining the Straw Hat Pirates, and then Loki was brought up during a time in which Brooke was instrumental throughout the entire arc of Whole Cake Island. This is then made more interesting because Brooke himself has a relationship with gangsters, because like Capone Game-Beiji, he too is from the West Blue, and during his flashback in his youth, he cut down members of the Milan family. The Milan family most likely is a criminal family of the West Blue, one of the 5 that Capone Game-Beiji might have trampled on during his rampage of the West Blue before he became a pirate. So, coming off of that, another interesting comparison, and I'm just going to mention this because it is a fairly small point, is that both Shirahoshi and Loki are the largest beings of their respective races. Because outside of their respective fathers, who are most likely larger than them, and we know this for a fact when it comes down to comparing Shirahoshi to Neptune, because Shirahoshi is 38 feet and 11 inches tall, while her father is a cool 40 feet tall. And this most likely is the case between Harold and Loki. So, outside of their fathers, Loki and Shirahoshi are the largest of their species, Loki being the largest ancient giant from Elbaf that we have currently, and Shirahoshi being the largest mermaid to date. So with that being said, they do compare well against each other there. However, their fathers have met before, and herein lies the joke that brings everything together. Because in chapter 1167, during the very lengthy Zebek flashback, Neptune and Harold are speaking, and they talk about marrying their 2 offspring off in the future. And that's when the conversation ends in a toast, and it is Harold who says, "To the future of my little brat and your shaggy daughter." And then Neptune retorts and says, "She will not be shaggy." This joke is actually a repetition of a joke that we come across in the Grand Odin flashback in Wano, because during his various adventures with Roger, Odin and the rest of the Roger pirates end up in Fishman Island and have a conversation with Neptune. And then the whole aspect of Neptune having a daughter comes up again, serving as a prelude to the conversation between Harold and Neptune later. And here we find that in 10 years, Shirahoshi will be born, and a joke again is made about Shirahoshi being hairy, because it is Roger who says, "Don't worry, we're not coming back in the future to kidnap your hairy daughter." And Neptune retorts again saying she will not be hairy. So it's quite funny that this joke has been repeated twice now in the past in reference to Shirahoshi before she is born. However, keeping that in mind, let's go back to the present. Loki is talking to Mosa, or Shaggy, via a snow Dendemushi whom is hairy, and said Dendemushi in the anime is shown to have blue eyes. Shirahoshi also has blue eyes, and like we've been saying multiple times now, the reference to Shirahoshi being hairy has come up multiple times. However, this was not true, but the repetition of the joke makes me think that it's kind of ironic that Shirahoshi, possibly under the alias of Shaggy, would be talking to Loki via a Dendemushi that is indeed hairy or shaggy. So that's why I think Shirahoshi is actually the identity of Shaggy. taking the joke and making it her nickname. It's also quite interesting when you start to compare the different situations that Loki and Shirahoshi find themselves in throughout their respective arcs, because both of their situations start to parallel quite interestingly when you look at their respective arcs, because both of them start their arcs in bondage. Shirahoshi is being held up in a tower to keep her safe from Vanderdecken the Ninth, and Loki is chained up to a tree in the underworld of Elbaf. But in talking about Vanderdecken, both of them actually are a part of political marriage subplots, because Vanderdecken wants to marry Shirahoshi not for love, but for power, as he knows that she is actually the ancient weapon Poseidon. The same thing goes for Loki, because Big Mom wanted to marry her daughter, Charlotte Lola, off to Loki so that she would have the full military might of Elbaf at her disposal, making her Pirate King or Pirate Queen. But it's also quite funny that in both situations with Shirahoshi and Loki, that both characters were significantly larger than the other character in the marriage subplot. Shirahoshi is far larger than Vanderdecken, and of course Loki is far larger than Lola. But what's also quite funny about this is that in both situations, a Doe fruit user is involved, but it's always the man in the situation, which I find funny, because Vanderdecken has the Paramecia type Doe fruit power known as the Mark fruit, and of course, Loki is the user of the Dragon fruit mythical type model Nidhogg. So that is funny. That is funny. But to continue, now, with all that being said, it's also quite interesting that both of them are really set aside biologically, because not only are they the largest members of their respective species, but they also have some weird racial abilities going on, because Shirahoshi is actually Poseidon, meaning that as a mermaid, she has the ability to summon sea kings. However, Loki, for some reason, has very weird demon eyes. As of this recording, we do not know what these demon eyes mean, but these eyes do set him apart from every other ancient giant that we have seen in this series so far, even when you consider his own father. On top of that, Loki is also in possession of a very interesting devil fruit that may or may not have lore implications behind it. His devil fruit is known as the Dragon fruit mythical type model Nidhogg, and for some reason, it is regarded in very close proximity of importance to Nika. So we don't know quite just yet what this fruit means, but its importance has been alluded to over the course of the Elbaf arc. Both of them are royalty in their homeland. Both of them have siblings. Shirahoshi has 3 brothers, and of course, Loki has a brother. So it's funny that both of them have brothers in that way. That's funny. But also, both of them are the youngest in their families and the largest, because Shirahoshi is larger than her 3 brothers, and Loki is way larger than his brother Haruden. And of course, in a very funny way, Haruden is the older brother while Loki is the younger brother. So Loki is way bigger than his older brother. Both of them have parents that are deceased. Loki lost his real mother, his birth mother, and has lost his father due to his own hand. Shirahoshi has lost her mother. Both of their fathers were the reigning kings in their land, and both of their fathers were hailed as being special. Neptune having the power to talk to whales, and Herald was a huge ancient giant sought after by Zebek and Emu for his strength. Lastly, both of them are freed from their bondage, technically, by Luffy. Luffy helps Shirahoshi escape the tower, and he does, with the help of Zoro, help Loki out of his bondage. And both of them go on to develop a very personal relationship with Luffy over the course of their respective arcs, which is why I could believe, seeing as how so many elements of the two are showing up in their respective arcs, that we could have a Laboon situation in which Loki might be emboldened to join the crew at that point, because now, much like with Brook and Laboon, the Straw Hats know a dear friend of Loki's through their time in Fishman Island. And most likely it will be uncovered in that conversation whenever that happens that Shaggy is actually Shirahoshi. Based on the various jokes we've been talking about, perhaps she just took on Shaggy as a nickname because maybe she got wind of those jokes from her father. So I do think if this comes to pass and Loki finds out that the Straw Hats are all friends with Shirahoshi, he will be further interested in the group and join them officially, seeing as how to him, they aren't bad people because they know a friend of his and helped her out personally in her time of need. So with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. This was the 4th year anniversary video for the Polly P Works channel. It's been a wild ride. We have over 2,000 videos made. I never thought we would be making these many when I first started, but yeah, here we are. Over 2,000 videos and over 2,000 subscribers. We just hit 2,100 pretty recently. I am over the moon. Thank you all so much for being a great community, and I will bring more One Piece content to you in the future. And I'm just really happy that a lot of things are happening in the story. And I'm happy that we called a lot of things this year, especially like Ragnar actually being real and being a giant hammer that Usopp may indeed wield in the future. We called a while ago that Bonnie would have the age fruit, and I called off all the abilities that the age fruit would possibly have, and a lot of those were correct. The only one I missed was turning gear 5th, which how can anyone predict that? And then we also did call the idea of her being the apprentice, which still might happen. We have to wait and see. And we've been calling a lot of things about Loki, and we got a lot of them right, including perhaps this shrinking idea, because we called out that he would turn into a Nidhogg. We called out that the Nidhogg was actually foreshadowed by Killingham's nightmare creatures. We've been on a roll. And I'm ever so grateful that you have all been there with me on this journey. And I hope that you will continue to go forward with me as we make more videos in the future. So it's been a great year for One Piece. The One Piece live action adaptation season 2 came out. That was pretty good. So yeah, big things for One Piece, big things for the channel coming soon. And I'm just grateful to be here talking with you all. So with that being said, if you are liking the video so far, click the like button. And if you want to see more from me, click the subscribe button, followed by that bell so you never miss a video. In addition, if you could, click the hype button because it really does help. With that being said, thank you for another year on YouTube. Give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polly P Works.